We started as a side project. We were all three founders working in tech startups, and we wanted to do something on the side that's very different from our jobs, and most importantly, we wanted to work together. And this was what we're solving today with Veridion was a pain point that I felt very early in my career. So basically, we wanted to just start addressing that and see where it goes. Didn't have a long-term plan, didn't want to turn it into a business or turn it into a startup. It sort of happened. And right at the moment when it started to show some promise, we had my and Mihai's former boss, Matei Pavel, who wanted to put an angel investment check. And so we turned it into a full-time thing to start exploring the potential of turning it into a business. Back then, we didn't have any even product or clients or anything like that. We just wanted to build AI to replicate the human level or the human process of doing research about companies. And we understood that we need a very high degree of technical excellence and very complex infrastructure and to process a lot of data. Our biggest question mark was, is this technically possible? Can it be done at this scale? So we focused on this in the beginning. When I finished college, I wanted to work in small companies because my thesis was that it's easier to learn a lot when all the company happens in like 50 square meters around you. And you have the 10 people that make everything happen near you, and you can talk to them, you can ask questions, you can receive tasks from multiple fields and so on. So I only worked in small companies, mostly tech, mostly startups. So by the time when we started Veridion, we were very familiar with what it takes. We've hired and built teams before, we've used budgets, we understood the basic principles of what a startup needs. Well, I think people in tech shouldn't be worried about failing at all because you always have a plan B. You can always get a job. You get good paying jobs. You meet a lot of people. You can join other projects. So we never really worried on this about this. I remember the only difficult choice was that we all had good job offers, high paying, and people once we quit our job started going after us. So we had to say no to a few good offers. But it's the reverse problem. It's is it worth trying a startup and taking like a few months? But I think the risk at the beginning is actually zero. It's much worse after you've made a series of successful steps and you feel like you have something to lose. Then it starts like you have something to fear, or there's a risk of not meeting an opportunity. But I think in the beginning take 6 months, try out an idea, see if it works, and if not, it'll take you 1 week to find a job. At the beginning, we had a lot of stupid questions, like should we hire first or build a product first? For example, should we, as founders, do the first sale, or should we hire a sales team? And actually, our prior experience working in startups helped a lot, not because it was directly relevant to the problems we had, but because we had a lot of people that had vast experiences and were building startups before us that we basically took as mentors. So a lot it was about in which order to do what, and I still think like the main challenge about around every problem is actually nailing the timing. So the perfect hire at the wrong time will be a bad hire. The big client way too early will kill your startup, and so on. And it's very counterintuitive. Like it's very hard to figure out beforehand. We definitely made mistakes along the way, but I think for the biggest decisions in the lifetime of the company, yes. We made a few mistakes. We hired a bit too much too early, and then tried to, for example, grow the sales team too fast, but not major mistakes. I think we had the right people around us. We took mentors, angel investors, people more experienced than us, and we always debated before we did, even if for a short time. So not sacrificing speed. I'd say the first time it was a bit easier than we expected in a weird way. we started with a bias that I think a lot of people have. I hear it from other founders. We wanted to raise money from Central Europe or Western Europe because we said at the moment we had a working piece of technology. We didn't have any recurring clients and only a POC to show for. It wasn't fully automated. So we said we're not going to find in Eastern Europe or even less in Romania people that will take this degree of risk and will just invest based on a technology thesis and trust us that okay, it's going to take us another 2 years to reach the right level where it's all automated and the technology is matured. And we said nobody's going to take that risk with us. And it turns out we were wrong, and that's exactly where we found the people most willing to invest and take technology risks. And for us, it was a surprise. Like we expected to be very different or very difficult. But from the time when we met Gapminder, I think it took about 2 weeks to get funding, 2 or 3 meetings or so. It was extremely fast, much better than what we expected. But the funding round from the end of last year, it was much harder in an economic downturn, completely different level of challenge. For us, it was a prerequisite. So the one thing that mattered, we didn't even care as much about it becoming a profitable business or a very large company or try to measure the risk. What we really cared about is that we do something that's a technological breakthrough, something that other people don't make. We didn't want it to, we had no interest in being like the Romanian version of something that already exists in London. Like it felt super boring. We said that we're much better off go take a job at Google or whatever. And what was really important is that we at least make an attempt for something that is really bold, something where, or an approach where others have failed. And we try to figure out a road. And it was much more important for us to try that ambitious thing. So actually, the prerequisite was that there's an international market, there's an opportunity that other people see, other people agree on, but it's really hard to address it and to get to a point where you can do this automatically or not have 1,000 people hired that do the research and correct the data and build different models that get corrected all the time. As we do have clients that started that way and now they replace hundreds of people with our technology. So our main prerequisite was that we actually didn't want any clients from Romania, just to be able to make sure we don't fall into the trap of building something that somebody needs here, but they need it because they haven't heard of that great solution that already exists. For sure, especially enterprise sales, selling large contracts to large companies that have risk management and they do due diligence and all sorts of things that are inconvenient for startups. It's always challenging, but as anything I think in the journey of an early stage startup, you have to realize what the challenge will be and to try to find a way to hack it, at least partially. So our first 4 clients we took from by building relationships with partners that were already selling to the large companies. And so we didn't have to have our own contract. We didn't have to have our own legal team. We didn't have to have insurance and ISO certifications and different things that large enterprises require. So we basically just used a reseller that already had a relationship with Fortune 500 companies. And all we had to worry about is build a product and ship it and make sure it does what we say it does. And it was much easier. So we probably shortcutted our first sales contracts from taking maybe 12, 15 months to taking 6. Well, first of all, there's a lot more money available, even though we still don't have the amount of funds that we should have and that we see in nearby countries. There are many international funds that address Eastern Europe and partners that are always here, even if they actually represent German funds, let's say. We have a good pre-seed and seed ecosystem for local funding, which makes life a lot easier because you don't have the cultural barriers and people or investors will have a lot more context about you and about the startup and how hard it is and maybe be able to do background checks. What used to be the case was that there were very few people that needed to say yes to an idea, and then you run out of people if they don't, and then you have to search for funding in other countries, and you don't know in which countries, and it's hard to build that network. Now it's a lot easier. So there are many people actually really well connected that can intro you to tens and maybe hundreds of VCs, and it's much easier to get funding. What I think we do have on the other side of the experience, we have teams that have led sales and marketing in companies like UiPath, and that can provide a lot of experience in go-to-market, and in some cases even provide intros or help with complicated things like pricing. What I think we're missing is I think we build too much of the same startup. If you look around at successful startups, it's really hard to find a B2C successful startup, for example. And in that regard, if you try to do something different that doesn't distribute through partners, or that doesn't sell enterprise, or that doesn't address an automation need, it's still gonna be a lot harder for you. Although you have the funding, but you don't have the relevant experience of, let's say, a marketing team that can scale ads. Our experience with investors has actually been surprisingly good. One thing that I was afraid that we won't be able to find, and we found plenty of, is the long-term thinking, the patience, you make 2 mistakes before doing it right type of attitude without putting any artificial pressure. So at least in our case, I'm very happy with the investors we have. I think, of course, you do hear horror stories of others doing the opposite. And that's really bad from a first-person experience. For a first-time founder, you expect the investor to be experienced, and you actually listen to what they say. And if they give you the wrong advice, you can potentially make a fatal mistake and just kill the startup by accident. I think what is starting to happen now and a few years ago wasn't really the case. Is that investors try to be a lot more connected, because a lot of the value can come just from knowing the right people and be able to make the right introduction at the right time, which I think is the case now, and it wasn't the case 2 or 3 years ago. I think we're on the good side. I think we're very resilient. I don't think we kill off ideas. Maybe we're too stubborn about not killing startups. We stick at it. We try. We go through every hurdle that comes our way. Where we have a don't quit attitude, which I think makes spectacular stories like UiPath 7 years in the making happen, which is very uncommon. Like everybody, if you think of like the US mindset or the UK mindset, you'd kill UiPath 7 times before you get to being UiPath. So I think what we have on our side is the resilience for sure. We have a good technical expertise, and we're not afraid to tackle really hard problems. And you can see this a lot with the types of startups that arise from Romania. None of them is simple. I think on the bad side, I think we don't know what to focus on. So a lot of the time you see people maybe focusing on networking way too soon and trying to make like a name for themselves before it's useful. And in the beginning, I think before you have the first client, the first product, before you see signs of product market fit, time is extremely important, and any momentum that you lose will come back and punish you tenfold afterwards. So I think there's this culture that comes from actually being more experienced, working in startups before building one, of how not to focus on the wrong things at the wrong phase. I think there's plenty of opportunity here. It would have been great to have this wave happen 5 years before, simply for the reason of how cost efficient it is to build the first iterations of the product. Now the salaries are especially in Bucharest, are at maybe Berlin level. It's not super cheap. You cannot do it in an apartment anymore with like $3,000 per month. So maybe in that regard, we missed some steps, and there's a collateral damage that happens from having a culture mostly of outsourcing and services rather than startups. Teams get built in a different way, teams get managed in a different way. The cadence of how something gets built, for example, we try to we aim for every person in our technical team to put something into production every single week, which in the first 2 or 3 months of joining our team, if you come from a larger company, it's a shock. Like, they don't understand how it will be possible. And then they go through the motion. Of course, it's stressful at the beginning because you're trying to do something you've never done before. But then we get into a sort of cadence that if these people go in 3 years and build a different company, that will have ripples effect in 5 other startups. And I think we missed that culture and the way you build things that is specifically tailored for how to do a startup, how to launch features fast, how to test a lot, how to make mistakes quickly, and so on. I think compared to Silicon Valley, it's a lot easier. It's counterintuitive. You'd expect it to be a lot easier in Silicon Valley because you have all the funding, all the networking, and hire people from Netflix. But I think in reality, you cannot really hire people from Netflix unless you're from Facebook yourself. You need a lot more money to launch an MVP. People don't have patience because there's a lot of opportunity cost. So if you have a member of the team and they see you not launching for 6 months, they'll just go join the next Uber. And it's a sort of fear of missing out that it is in the environment. You hear stories about investors that join the board meeting for 2 quarters and then the 3rd quarter they don't show up because you're too slow. So having that people abandoning you through tough times, I think it's a brutal experience. They kill off ideas fast, which is great at the ecosystem level. But for you as a founder, if you really believe in something and you need 2 more quarters, you should have that time. And I think receiving that in an environment like Romania, it's much easier. Then it's much easier to get noticed. It's much easier to convince people to join you because they don't have to choose between 3 startups that are of Elon Musk and Zuckerberg's new idea and like the latest startup that received funding from Sequoia. And it's a lot easier to get top 1% level of talent just because you don't have that much of a competition around you. So you compete with large corporations, which is normal, but you don't compete with 100 other high growth startups for the same opportunity. And I think from 0 to 1, of course, sales is going to be more difficult, marketing is going to be more difficult, but those are much more solvable problems than not having the right team to build a product, for example. I think we're going to see 2 things. I think the new generation, I'm 31 myself, so I look at the people coming out of college now and see that they're very clearly of a different mentality. I think the new generation will try a lot more things. So we'll see a bit of try 5 stupid ideas until you find a good one, which is a much better approach than what we're used to. So I think we're going to see a lot more ideas come up, and startups fail very early, which is normal and healthy, but didn't really happen 5 or 10 years ago. We have a very low rate of failure, surprisingly so, because only the very few have tried 5, 10 years ago, and they really stuck to it. So I think this is going to happen a lot. We're going to have a lot of people trying a lot of things, especially youngsters, 18, 19-year-old. It'll be interesting. And get the right experience. And number 2, I think we're going to see this generation of companies get more funding, and we're going to have maybe 2 or 3 more unicorns in the next 5 years. I expect that. In the region, I think we share one advantage, which is having a very, in all the former communist countries, having a very engineering mindset, which helps. If you take it to a good enough level, it helps a lot because you build very complicated things. Look at UiPath. And that, I think, is shared in the region. I think the resilience sets us apart in general. There are some stories that will become famous one day, of a lot of startups going, barely making it from 1 month to the next one for years, and then finally breaking through, and they'll make those stories available. And I think we'll have this common denominator of resilience everywhere. Even, not just founders, but also employees. They stick through the hard times. They stick through the challenges. They take lessons out of failures and so on. So I think it's a more of an ecosystem. I would name it Hacking Goliath.